You're listening to The Weather Junkies.
Oh boy. Large wedge tornado coming up into Tuscaloosa. A winter storm warning is in effect for our area.
So we can expect at least another 2 to 4 inches overnight. Then that snow is
The
probably...
National Weather Service in Huntsville has issued a tornado warning for northwestern Maine.
14 to 22 inches of snow!
Good evening, welcome to episode 4 of the Weather Junkies. We're still just getting started here. Now we're on our 4th episode. It's the week of Thanksgiving, so we're actually recording this a day early. It's Tuesday evening, the 24th. Wanted to give us a little more time between now and Thanksgiving, so we'll do it tonight instead. And we have a special guest on the show from the West Coast of the United States, and this week also features Dakota coming to us from Maryland. So a little bit of a change for this week. I'm still coming to the show from Connecticut, and I believe we have Dakota joining us now. Dakota, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I hopped over the Mississippi and went from Colorado to Maryland, and it's a lot nicer out here than it was in Colorado. It got pretty chilly after I left, and out here it's getting into the upper 40s, mid 50s. So I'm really enjoying that. How's the weather up there? I'm assuming kind of similar.
It's been very quiet overall for really a couple of months. Every once in a while we'll get about an inch of rain, and it seems like very frequent bursts of warmth. So we'll go a few days with average weather, and then we surge to above average. In fact, 60 degrees is the forecast for this Friday after Thanksgiving, and the average is in the upper 40s. So it's certainly a very interesting trend going into winter, and it looks like it's going to continue as we head into December. So no real signs of winter here yet. We haven't had any measurable snow either.
Hey, I'll take it for now. Last winter was such a cold winter. It's not too bad. So on tonight's show, we'll have special guest Erik Pytlak, who's a meteorologist at Bonneville Power Administration. Erik, how's it going over there on the West Coast?
It has been a really wet fall around here. After all the big news here in the West was about the summer drought and wildfires and what have you, but right around late August, the switch flipped. And we've been getting a steady diet of rain and now mountain snow across the region. Some pretty big storms. The big national news storm last week was we had a storm come through with 100-mile-an-hour winds in some of our mountain areas and 70, 80-mile-an-hour winds in eastern Washington, which caused quite a bit of power disruption, especially in the Spokane area. And so there's a lot of cleanup going on with that. And now, with this upper level low spinning up over the Great Basin, now we're going to get cold. We're actually getting Arctic air pulling into the region. So we're looking for our coldest weather now since last January over the next 7 days. So, which, by the way, for Portland, cold means lows in the lower 20s and highs in the 40s. So, here in the Pacific Northwest, we tend to get onshore flow a lot, and that keeps the night times warm-ish. And it keeps the high temperatures down in the 40s, so we end up with normally, highs in the 40s and lows in the 30s. But with this little bit of an Arctic air mass, it's going to be pretty chilly around here. So it is good news for skiing. It's good news for water supply, and we're just kind of hoping that this holds on a little longer.
Yeah, so we've noticed that there's been a lot of active weather up there, and we thought it'd be a great time to have you on the show to kind of talk about how that's affected the power sources and some of the distribution between wind and hydro and maybe even thermal. So we're going to get to that in a second after our Twitter segment. So if you hang on to the line, we'll be back with you in a moment.
Sounds great.
Yeah, and Erik, feel free to chime in if you have a great thought as we go through these tweets. Right now, though, we're going to start the Trending in the Weather Twitterverse segment, and Dakota has put most of the work, I should say all of the work in on this segment this week. I've kind of been a little out of the loop. But we'll start with our first tweet, and this one is by Greg Diamond, and as always, we read the bio of the Twitter account to give some kind of a perspective. And Greg's bio says that he's a graphic meteorologist and weather producer at the Weather Channel. He graduated from SUNY Albany, and he's a native Long Islander. The tweet that we are talking about is one that he tweeted on November 23rd, so that would be yesterday. He wrote, "I never understood why meteorologists are always at the forefront of reporting earthquake news. It's not even the same field." And this is a topic that comes up all the time. Dakota, what sparked your interest with this one?
Well, it kind of is along the same lines of the meteor thing that we talked about a few episodes ago. And it seems to be an ongoing, I don't know if it's a problem or I guess it's more of just a topic that the weather community is talking about. And I really wanted to get your take on it because, obviously you have quite a bit more experience, or you have all the experience. I have no experience with having to report, earthquakes or talking about tsunamis or really anything in the earth sciences. So how do you approach those types of situations at your station?
I think it's a pretty simple answer, and it comes down to who has the science background and who doesn't have the science background. In the communication business, the only prominent scientists are meteorologists. Occasionally, you can have on an expert from any given field of work, but that would be someone that's likely not employed by the communication organization. So whether that's NBC or CBS or ABC or a local station, the only person that really has any kind of science knowledge is the meteorologist. And so, from my personal view, it's a little bit more uncomfortable talking about something that I don't have as much experience in, but really it's probably better that someone like me or you talks about it than someone who graduated with a degree in communications and has no scientific background. So I think it works out.
That's a good point. Just a quick note, the AMS has a station scientist initiative that I think is really a good step towards informing people on, or informing, I guess, TV meteorologists on some of the things they need to know and some of the misnomers about earthquakes and meteor showers. So on to our next tweet. This is from Philip Klotzbach, and he is I believe he's a researcher here at CSU, and he does a lot of tropical work. And his tweet, you can follow him at Phil Klotzbach on Twitter. His tweet is, "Infa is the record-shattering 24th Cat 4 to 5 tropical cyclone of the Northern Hemisphere season, and the prior full season record was 18, which happened twice in '97 and 2004. That's a pretty remarkable record-breaking number. It beats it by 6 tropical cyclones. So that just really goes to show you how active of a season we've had in the Northern Hemisphere, both Pacific and Atlantic. I guess Atlantic, not nearly as much. It's mainly Pacific.
Are you showing the tweet right now, Dakota?
Yes.
Great. So he attached a satellite picture with it. That's an interesting stat. I'm glad you chose that tweet because I hadn't seen it. The 24th Category 4 or 5 tropical cyclone. So of course that includes hurricanes, but tropical cyclones aren't called hurricanes everywhere, and so that's why he wanted to include every major storm.
Right, typhoon, cyclone, and hurricane.
24th, and the record was 18. That's impressive. And obviously we've had luck in that one has not hit the United States. Obviously impacted Mexico.
Yeah, we've been fortunate to have a fairly quiet Atlantic season.
Thanks to El Nino.
Yeah, and El Nino's pretty much the bottom line for why we're having so much activity in the Pacific. I got a lot of warm sea level or sea surface temperatures out there.
And you're even, this is Erik, by the way. You're even seeing it now. You have a tropical storm in the Pacific right now that's taking aim on the west coast of Mexico in late November. I mean, that's pretty unusual.
Yeah.
Especially one that could go cat. I mean, it looks like the current forecast is to bring it up to at least a Cat 2. That's pretty impressive for late November.
I'm glad you brought that up because I believe it's one of the latest tropical hurricanes in the I guess Eastern Pacific. So it'll be interesting some of the impacts it might have because it does look like it's going to make landfall. Do you know if it's going to make landfall as a tropical storm or a hurricane?
But right now, the latest advisory says hurricane.
Oh, okay.
Our next tweet, is that the Steve Rudin tweet?
Yes, yes.
So this one here was tweeted by a meteorologist in Washington, D.C. He works for ABC7. It should be noted he has nearly 60,000 followers on Twitter. I don't follow him personally, but I have seen his tweets come across in the past couple of years, and when I first saw this tweet that Dakota had selected, I thought, this is the guy that has tweets that usually go viral for one reason or another. This one here, he writes, "The chemtrails this morning were beautiful over Warrenton, Virginia this morning. Thanks for sharing, Bill." And the photo shows the sunrise with clouds in the sky, cloud streaks that he calls chemtrails. The tweet did pretty well. It got 37 retweets, 47 likes, as Twitter now calls it. So you chose this tweet. Why, Dakota?
Well, I want to go through my experience that I had this morning. This tweet was sent out at 8 a.m. So I was waking up, just kind of getting out of bed. I'm on my phone looking through Twitter, and I see this tweet, and I'm like, my initial reaction is like, oh my gosh, this pretty popular online presence TV meteorologist thinks that chemtrails are real and that the contrails are chemtrails. So then I scroll down, read some of the replies, and then I realize that he's completely kidding. He doesn't. He obviously knows they're contrails and not chemtrails. But to Joe's six-pack out there, they're going to think that this TV meteorologist is perpetuating this theory that chemtrails are the streaks in our sky. And then there was actually quite a vivid conversation in the replies about there were a few people who do believe in contrails, and they were having a little bit of fun, I guess. But this kind of, I don't know, it upset me. It put kind of a bad taste in my mouth because I feel like someone who has that many followers and that kind of presence shouldn't, if they're going to be sarcastic about something like this, maybe make it a little more known.
Yeah, I try not to dive too deeply into the chemtrail debate because maybe Erik has some insight in this. I'm not quite sure how it even started. I'm not sure how these high clouds suddenly got turned into, oh my gosh, they're killing us type discussion. I don't know how that began, but I do agree with you. There are people that would read that and say, oh gee, chemtrails, is that something new like the polar vortex that I've never heard before? So it's a little risky.
Yeah, and I don't know, the chemtrail thing, I have no idea how it got started either. But this does bring up a broader discussion that, Tyler, I was just about to ask you is, this is really an interesting dilemma that broadcast meteorologists face is you want to be personable with your audience, and sometimes that means humor. But on the flip side, that humor in something like this is a very humorous, posting can really get twisted. So how do you strike that balance, professionally when you are on air and you're trying to, be personable and be, approachable on air, while at the same time not to get too informal and then have something like this, get blown up on you.
I think in general, personally, I just try to avoid. Well, I was going to say I try to avoid controversial things, but that would include global warming, and I don't avoid that. Generally, I don't delve into controversial things if I don't have to, and I think this would be an example of that. If I ever mentioned chemtrails, I would put it in context and try to explain why or what that term means, but I really don't mention it. So that's generally the approach I take.
I think that's a pretty good approach, because
there are plenty of ways to be personable without going down paths that can get you in trouble.
Yeah, I think sarcasm on Twitter for weather people, I think that's a whole segment that we could talk about, because it's I think it's kind of a fine line that you have to deal with and make sure you're on the right side of it.
So our next tweet is that one from Ian?
Yes. Before we go into this, we may be having some issues right now with our broadcast. So if it looks like it paused on the broadcasting end.
Did someone tweet you?
No one's tweeted me, but I have it live right now, and we lost all of our viewers, and it's paused right now on Twitter. So I guess we'll just keep going with it. But
yeah.
But we may, if you can hear me now, then that's good. But if you got lost or it got broken off, sorry about that. Make sure to go back and listen to the. It'll be online, not live, and hopefully it won't be all chopped up.
So this one from Ian Livingston. If you spend any time on Twitter, you're probably familiar with him. He is a senior researcher at the Center for 21st Century Security and Intelligence, commonly known as a contributor for the Washington Post's Capitol Weather Gang. Very active presence on Twitter, over 4,000 followers, and he tweeted the National Weather Service in D.C. is implementing a new winter storm graphics for days 4 through 7. He says he's looking forward to this. It looks good. I've actually never seen anything like this. I don't believe it exists in southern New England at all, but I've enlarged it, and you can see this graphic from the Weather Service says, how does it help me? Basically, you can take a quick glance and gauge based on the color what kind of winter storm threat there is. It goes from none to high. So this kind of looks like the severe weather outlook issued by the Storm Prediction Center. And apparently you can click on the maps to see daily confidence versus potential impact.
I am very excited about this. It could be a game changer in how the National Weather Service predicts winter storms in more than 3 days out. Right now, to get a good idea of what kind of winter storm or winter impacts you're going to have 3 days, more than 3 days out, you really just have to look at the forecast discussion and an icon and maybe a little bit on their webpage. But with this, this is gonna add a whole new dimension to long range winter storm forecasting, and it's gonna add a little more than just having the watches and the warnings.
I think it's exciting. To add to your point about only knowing based on the icons, unfortunately, the other way that is based on social media buzz, and whether the person in his basement in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, is forecasting a foot of snow 7 days out. So it has to do with social media buzz, which happens all too often. But so I think the challenge for this will be who's going to use it, who's going to distribute it, because I don't know that everyone goes to the National Weather Service to get a forecast. So
that's a good point you made, because you're right. I meant not if you're going to the National Weather Service. That's the only thing, and the buzz is certainly a big proponent of the who's getting milk and toilet paper.
Do you know anyone else that's doing this, or is it just DC?
I think it's just the Sterling National Weather Service office. They are kind of on the forefront of the winter storm prediction process. I think they were the first National Weather Service office to have a winter storm page during a winter storm that has like the snowfall accumulations and all the watches and warnings. So they might be kind of the test ground for some of these products.
Hopefully we get a few storms to try this this year.
That's probably why they picked this year.
Well, yeah, I was just about to say that this is new for the United States. This is not new for Europe. That several European countries do a extended range forecast on this kind of a color-coded index. Like, for example, Britain in particular has been doing this for quite a while, and they go out 5 days, though. What I find interesting here, though, is that, one, a National Weather Service office is going to do this, and two, that they're going to go out to 7 days. And that I'll be very curious to see how this goes. But there has been a real movement in Europe to go to color-coded forecasts for folks, and pictures are worth 1,000 words. So this is a very interesting development to see. I'll be curious to see how it works out.
I will be too. Great job, Dakota, bringing this up, because I hadn't seen it. I can't wait to see it in use. Let's bring in Erik and get some more background information for what he does and what it's all about there.
Sure. I'm the manager of weather and stream flow forecasting at the Bonneville Power Administration. It's actually an arm of the Department of Energy that was established way before the Department of Energy was established. We were established during the Great Depression to bring electricity, cheap hydroelectric power, to the Pacific Northwest rural areas that had not been bypassed as the nation was electrified in the early 1900s. And so that was part of a New Deal project that Roosevelt started. And then right after the Bonneville Dam was built, we started ramping up toward a war effort and the realization that the Pacific Northwest has a lot of aluminum resources. We have a lot of timber industry in here, lots and lots of trees. We had a lot of industry in both Portland and Seattle that could build planes and ships pretty quickly. You needed power to do that. So then it became a larger building project with Grand Coulee Dam, which is the second dam on the system, and that is a huge dam. And then after that, as we came out of World War II, more and more dams were added to the Pacific Northwest, and so there are dozens of dams up here in the Pacific Northwest, and what we do, my group does, is forecast the weather and stream flow into those projects, 31 in particular that are owned by the federal government, and that we manage the power output from those to basically pay down the bonds on the debt and keep electricity flowing at a cheap, at a low price, low cost to a lot of rural areas in the Pacific Northwest. So it's a pretty cool job. Very lucky to have fallen into this about 5 years ago.
So I was doing a little bit of reading on their website, and that was kind of the only thing I was looking at. And there was one interesting thing I saw from I guess it was you guys had a windstorm, I think a week ago. Was it about a week ago?
Yes, it was.
And I was looking at they have like a power distribution of between thermal, wind, and hydro, and it was so cool to see the wind at kind of a peak on the graph last Tuesday, and then trickling down this week at kind of a low baseline. How do you guys prepare for a storm like that, and what kind of impact does that have on your I guess just your overall operation?
Well, first of all, what you're seeing on there is the wind generation, which that is an interesting item in and of itself, where when winds get that high, you actually cannot run wind turbines because you'll burn up the motors and the generators inside those turbines. So you have to either feather them, in other words, purposely turn them to be inefficient, or you shut them down, and that's called a high-speed cutout because you don't want to damage the blades and the internal workings from them spinning too fast.
What's the threshold there for that?
It depends on the generator, but generally over 35 miles an hour. And the winds we had last weekend were over on the order of 70 miles an hour. So that was a pretty intense day. Now, the Bonneville Power Administration owns over 12,000 miles of transmission lines in the Pacific Northwest that we maintain and operate. Those are those big high-tension lines. They carry 230 kilovolts, sometimes 500 kilovolts. Those are big, towers and big lines. Those are actually designed to withstand winds up to 100 miles an hour, in some cases even higher. What gets us into trouble with such a windstorm like that is you lose local distribution. In other words, the power lines on the street come down, and two things will happen. One, we may be planning to sell and send electricity to those utilities as part of a marketing deal, and all of a sudden they don't need it anymore because the power line to take it to that house is now down. So we have to rebalance the system for that. We have to, in other words, back down generation at some of the hydroelectric projects so that we don't overcharge the lines and create a bigger problem. The second thing is we have a lot of experienced crews that can go out and help repair lines, and there's a lot of mutual assistance agreements in the region. BPA is part of those mutual assistance agreements, and on last Tuesday, for example, BPA helped to respond to several of those requests, particularly in some of the smaller utility districts that their ability to repair those lines quickly got overwhelmed. So we really help in those areas as well. So to prepare for that, basically our weather group sends out alerts to both transmission operations and power operations to alert them that the wind is coming and what the magnitude is and where the areas are going to be that are most likely to be impacted.
So the weather is both your friend and enemy.
Yeah, it is. And it's basically, if you know it's coming, and this is pretty much for anything that we do at BPA, as long as we know it's coming, we can prepare for it. The ones that get us are the surprises, the surprise rain events that suddenly start sending more flow into the rivers that we weren't expecting. Or, maybe if 3 months down the road we didn't see a drought coming or we didn't see a drought developing and we oversold power and now have to buy it back. So basically our number one mission is to provide state-of-the-science weather and stream flow forecasts to the agency and help other groups that manage the system be able to manage most effectively.
So we got into the weather very quickly. Where does your power go to? Who do you supply?
We supply most of our power to the Pacific Northwest and mostly to smaller utility districts that we have an obligation under decades of obligations that were incurred under, and I wouldn't say incurred, but obligations that we promised way back when BPA was first established in the 30s and 40s. But we do sell surplus power to bigger utilities, Portland, Seattle, Idaho. We also can sell power to Canada periodically, but the big driver now is selling power to California. Most of our surplus energy is sold to California and into their market. And of course, down there, they've had their own challenges with drought and the inability to produce much in the way of hydroelectric power just because their reservoirs are so low. So last year, we actually saw an increase in sales to California. So the power that we produce on our dams here in the Pacific Northwest basically gets eventually passed throughout the Western interconnection. So, but I'd say 2/3 of it is local, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and then surplus power is sold out to the other parts of the region, particularly California.
So I know you were talking about the long range, the forecasting of droughts and stuff like that. So it's a good mix of near term and longer term, would you say?
Yeah, it is a very good mix. In fact, my group is forecasting weather and stream flow both, starting from tomorrow all the way out for a year. So in a way, we have to be our own climate prediction center. And many energy companies have their own weather consultants that do long-range weather prediction. But we're also doing ensemble stream flow forecasts. So basically, what we take is we're forecasting what the range of possible stream flow outcomes could be 1 month to a year out, and that's used for public planning purposes. I'm sorry, not public, but power planning purposes.
What kind of effect does a strong El Nino have on the Pacific Northwest?
Well, that's an interesting question because without revealing too much of our forecast, no, seriously, because BPA is a power marketing administration, our forecast could be used against us. And what we're trying to do is earn enough money from those power sales to, one, keep power rates low in the region, but two, we have to pay down bonds on national debt. So it's kind of nice to be in one of the few federal agencies that actually works to pay down national debt. And it's neat, but the one thing we don't want to do is manipulate the market, and we're such a big player in the region that there's always a risk of that. So there's certain rules that I have to follow that I wish in the National Weather Service I actually didn't have to worry about that was my previous job before I came to BPA. But so I have to be a little careful about sharing that information. Now, having said that, a strong El Nino is pretty obvious. Everyone sees it, and the forecasts then become almost, I wouldn't say redundant, but because everyone sees the El Nino, you pull out all your playbooks on, all right, so the last 5 or 6 or 8 El Ninos, what happened to precipitation and temperature in the region? And so basically, all medium range forecasters across the whole country are really looking at that.
Well, I'm glad you didn't reveal too much information. We wouldn't want someone to to use that against you. So thank you for that. That was awesome. That was wonderful. On to kind of a different topic. How did you get into this field? What was your path after you graduated from Penn State?
Meandering. It started off, originally I wanted to be Tyler. I went to Penn State thinking I wanted to be a television meteorologist, and really was into that for my first, I'd say 2.5 years. And then I got lucky, I guess, and ended up with a summer internship with the National Weather Service in D.C., Washington, D.C. And I did that, and I started realizing, I really like the science side of this, too. I like broadcasting, and I still do, in a way, but I also like the science. And so I started branching off into that, and then ended up permanently with the Weather Service. And just like any other young TV meteorologist, now in the Weather Service, hey, tornadoes and snowstorms, and wow, this is really cool. Went a few years farther into my career, and then I got into hydrology. When I was in Iowa, we had very serious floods in the 1990s, and they needed all hands on deck and people who wanted to learn more about hydrology, and so I did, which then led me go to Tucson, Arizona, and I was the science officer there, where flash flooding and flooding was a big concern, but so was drought, and so was climate change. And then that started a whole different line of career path where I started looking into climate change and how agencies use climate change information. So that led to a master's degree, and then started working on a PhD, and then this opportunity came open at BPA. So basically what it meant was, to make a long story short, as soon as you think you got your career figured out, you probably don't. And it's actually kind of cool that if you're willing and a little bit of open to take a little risk periodically, that it can lead you into some really neat directions. And so that's basically what happened to me.
All right, I got one final question for you. What skill do you think an upcoming graduate with the meteorology degree, what skill would be most important to them if they were trying to follow in your footsteps?
I would think of, I was trying to. My first reaction right away was communication. You really need to be able to communicate. There are a lot of meteorologists out there who don't communicate well. And even if you're going to go into research, even if you're going to go into the National Weather Service, even if you're going to go into private sector and be in consulting, and that's a growing area, you need to be able to communicate your forecast. And if you can't, well, there's a lot of other good ones out there that you may find yourself not with a job. Secondly, though, and this is the thing that really has been emerging in the last 5 to 10 years. This is starting even, back in the day when I was at Penn State in the 90s, is your IT skills. Right now, we've gotten to the field has become so technical that even in television, and Tyler, you could probably confirm this, or at least I hope you confirm it, that you need really what makes you a person they want to keep around is if you've got strong IT skills to keep that weather system up and running, to understand the model better, to be able to program a nice graphic so that you can explain to someone what the weather is going to be. That's a skill that really, I wish I had done more in computer science when I was an undergrad and even a grad student. And it's one of those things that's like, if I could have gone back, I would have done that.
I could definitely confirm that the technical skills on the TV end, like you, perhaps I would do a little bit more on the coding end of things.
Yep.
But certainly the doors are still open to learn that. I mean, everything's online nowadays.
That's right. And finding a couple of really good friends to work with, either in your job or as a colleague at maybe a different market or someone across the country you're doing research with, you can pick those skills up. But I've always felt like I've always been one step behind the latest computer programming coding. When I was at Penn State, it was C++, and I was like, wow, I got to relearn that. Well, shoot, I'm still on Fortran. And so by the time I started learning C++, oh, wait, now we're on Linux. Okay, so now I'm scrambling to learn Linux. And now it's all right, so I got Linux down okay. Oh, wait, now it's Python. Okay, now I got to learn. At this point, I'm like, wow, now, I'm a manager and I have to push papers and do budgets, and it's one of those, I'm never going to be able to catch up. So now I really rely on staff, and I hire people that can do it instead.
Well, it's been great having you on the show, Erik. We thank you for taking some time out of your Tuesday before Thanksgiving. And glad you could talk about some of the work you do at the Power Administration, and we would certainly reach out to you in the future if need be, or if something pops up on the radar in the Northwest. So any final comments, Erik, before we end this show?
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving. Dakota?
Thanks, Erik, again for joining us. The next 2 weeks, I think we're going to have kind of a climate science theme to them, and they're certainly going to be shows that cannot be missed. We'll talk about the coming up climate summit in Paris, and we'll also talk about some of the business going on between NOAA and Congress and some of the issues they're having right now. So please join us in the next 2 weeks.
For Dakota, Erik, and myself, thanks for watching, and have a safe and happy Thanksgiving.